Okay, so Emily's decided that the construct that she's going to focus on is the family quality of life construct. So there are researchers that have looked at this particular construct before, but mostly in families with other types of developmental disabilities. And the way they define family quality of life is conditions where the family's needs are met and family members enjoy their life together as a family and have the chance to do things which are important to them. It's a general sort of description of what family quality of life, it seems to encapsulate everything. We're going to try to unpack that a little bit with our data. So the core concepts are that there's subjective and objective aspects, there's the dynamic aspects, individually and family-oriented. Family individuality is emphasized, and that it's multidimensional. And so there have been two main measures that exist to look at this construct of family quality of life. One comes from the Beach Center, the Beach Research Center on Disability, and they have a relatively short, probably a 20-minute interview, where they look at some of those issues around quality of life for the family, family interaction, parenting, emotional well-being, physical, material well-being, and disability-related support. The other measure, the International Project on Family Quality of Life, has similar things that they tap into. That interview is much longer and it's more in-depth. However, they tend to tap into the relatively similar dimensions. So depending on what it is, the goal of your research or how the sort of restrictions that you have, maybe in terms of time, you might opt for one versus the other. Okay, that's sure. The general findings from the literature are that families of children with developmental disability generally, not just those with living with children with autism, tend to be less satisfied with family quality of life than families of typically developing children. So that's not a real surprise. In general, the families are most satisfied with family relationships, but least with support from others. And again, that's not a big surprise. So the types of factors that impact family quality of life are, again, tapping different areas, sort of the child characteristics, family characteristics, the support that families get from services that they're provided. So it taps into a whole range of issues. And some of the child factors are related, so age-related issues. There's, of course, lifelong caregiving, concerns for the future of the child, the impact on other family members, and the disability severity, of course, affects families' quality of life. So the more severe a child's disability, the more that has an impact on the family's quality of life. Some of the family factors include income. And this seemed to be more relevant to mothers. So mothers find this more of an issue than fathers do. The amount of income in the family, probably related to how much money they can put toward disability-related supports for their child. Religious or spiritual practices, so difficulty maintaining these when you have a child with disability. But faith could be a protective factor in that it gave meaning to the disability, both positive and negative. And advocacy, so to achieve positive child outcomes, advocacy seemed to have a protective role. So it was stressful in terms of having to advocate all the time, But on the other hand, the parent could gain important skills and expand their social network. Then the support factors are more to do with family-centered practice. So the value of including partners, coordinating services, really bringing the family into the decision-making around supports is really important. And the match between the family need and providing the service was a key component. Okay, now specifically on families of children with ASD, what we know in the literature already is that they demonstrate the lowest satisfaction as compared to typically developing families, families with ADHD, and those with Down syndrome. So the families with ASD seem to be the most coping the least well in terms of their rated satisfaction. And that supports, again, is another key factor, even with families with ASD, that the supports that they're given can make a big difference in how they view their quality of life. So the research gaps that we see after we've done our review of the literature is that there's a real need to differentiate the type of disability. Grouping families who are coping with different types of disabilities is not as helpful in terms of actually coming down to practical information that can inform practice, policy. It just conflates everything. It doesn't really tell us very much. So we believe that by starting with ASD, at least we can focus on a population that obviously is quite prevalent, and a population in BC in particular that has a certain funding structure already associated with it, and that we can hopefully find out some information that can be practically helpful to the people who are, the professionals who are providing the services day to day, but also the government who's putting the money into the services. The unique issues that families of children with ASD face need to be understood. And this, so far, has not been understood in the literature. We don't really have a clear picture of what specifically the challenges are and how these families are coping day to day. The other thing we don't know is the changes across development. Is it the same? Likely not. There's probably quite a lot of difference between when you're first diagnosed or those early years where maybe you do have more funding, specifically here in BC, versus later years where there's less funding or you've had more time to cope with the diagnosis. We don't know which factors are impacting, but certainly there are changes across development, and we would like to take a closer look at that. And finally, the family protective factors. We know next to nothing about this. What are those things that are actually working, that families have found for themselves, that are making a difference for them? And how can we share those? How can we maximize that and bring that to other families who aren't coping so well? So this, if you're interested, our study is underway. We're going to be looking at changes across different stages of development. We're going to be looking at family characteristics, individual characteristics, and beliefs, as well as services that are received and the satisfaction that families have with their family quality of life. And we're looking at how family resilience relates to the satisfaction in family quality of life. We're also going to ask families in more in-depth interviews how they feel the services are helping them, or you know, how they see improvements. Can there be improvements to the services that are currently underway? So if anyone knows of any families who might be interested in our research, or if you are a family member and you'd like to participate, part of it is online. And the other part, if you agree, you can come in and do the more in-depth interview at our lab at Simon Fraser University. Okay. I think we've already covered that. So what Emily will do is she will give you just a really preliminary look at some of the comments we've had from families so far. Like I said, we're just in the beginning of collecting this data, so we can't put a lot of weight on this, but at least it'll give you a small sort of sampling of what we've gotten so far. Okay?
Okay, so as Grace mentioned, this research is really just beginning. So, you know, these are things that have already come up a few times. And what has been really interesting for us so far is we had an event a couple weeks ago to talk about family quality of life, and some of you were there. And the things that are coming up in this research are things that a lot of people brought up and we discussed with our panel. So, you know, we're getting support for the fact that these are salient issues, and the aim is to really find ways to address them. So one of the questions included in the survey is basically just how satisfied are you with the resources and funds available to your family, and then kind of elaborate on this. So these are the themes that have been coming up over and over again already, is that families are really grateful and appreciative for the funding and the particular structure that we have here in BC, as it gives us, or gives families flexibility. But on the other side of this is that families have communicated that they can't utilize the flexibility to the extent that they would like. So issues that have come up are that specific groups are left out of a lot of the services that are available. So teens, adults, we've been talking about this a lot, and you know, we know this is a huge issue of how to address their needs. High functioning individuals, one parent communicated that services that their child had gone to, they felt really out of place in, because they were, you know, high functioning and didn't relate to the other individuals in the group. And then anxiety issues, so so much focus on kind of adaptive skills or social skills, but dealing with these anxiety issues that get in the way of all of those other things. And a desire for supports that are specifically aimed at the parents and family. This is something that we talked extensively about a couple weeks ago, was parents wanting counseling or something that's geared for them to kind of prepare them for meeting these issues, or service navigation, how they can manage that. And as I said, desire for more funding flexibility. So a few parents talked about strengths of their children, so being really interested in the iPhone and computer and wanting services that utilized those strengths. More focus on daily living skills or adaptive skills, as well as marketable skills. So teaching computer training or computer skills that could then be implemented in the workplace and could serve them kind of across their lifespan. And here's a quote to just illustrate this. Much of what is useful for my son doesn't qualify for funding. And I don't know, I think some of you were at David Nicholas's talk this morning, and I was kind of furiously scribbling down notes because I thought so many of the issues that he talked about are really reflected here, even though we're talking about broader family quality of life. You know, individual quality of life and family quality of life, you can't tease those apart. So I think if kind of the services and supports are there for the individual, the families feel more satisfied with their quality of life. And these were a few quotes that I just pulled from some more general questions about how families felt with about their family quality of life. And these really echo kind of the two quotes that Grace showed in the beginning. So highlighting the constant challenges that they're facing. Home feels like another form of work to me, not a haven or a retreat, as there's endless cooking, cleaning to do. On top of that, another person's life to orchestrate continually with little interaction and support. It has caused a lot of stress over the years. But then others identified hope and these features of resilience. I know it is not easy to raise someone that learns and sees life different than us, but we as parents need to be positive, appreciate our kids, love them, teach them to be successful in life, and never give up on them. And just in terms of, we talk about some of the unique issues that are there, and this was something also we talked about, whether issues are really unique for these families or not, and maybe some of you can comment on that when we stop for questions. But something that a number of individuals have identified is having multiple family members on the spectrum. So having a spouse who may or may not be identified, but who show features of this broader phenotype, and the challenges this is presented in terms of parenting, their own relationship, and how they are, dealing with this in their child without maybe the same status as another family.